That sounds good. And I'm sure Rick Hutton, he always loves to talk water supply planning. So he already told me, yes, Jen, I would love to do it. So
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Yeah, hey,
Hi.
So,
Jennison, appreciate you coming in tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Sure, hopefully I can answer some questions, hopefully. But it's good to see everyone.
hi,
Yeah.
Jennison.
Hey, Stacy, good to see you.
You're getting your like public meeting punch card.
Right, exactly.
That's right. You know,
Yeah. Do I get some kind of prize by the end of the year if you get like so many public meetings?
Yes, a sticker.
Yay. Super citizen, right?
Yeah.
No.
you get an extension on your CCAC membership. So
Oh, nice. Well, I'll turn off my camera and mute myself while the business gets going.
Sounds good. Yeah, it looks like a few people are still signing on, but we'll be ready to start fairly shortly. Hi, George. Hi, David. David, you're still muted. I don't know if you're aware of that. Hi, Jeff.
There we go. Howdy.
Hi, David. So Bob is still expected to join us today, correct?
To the best of my knowledge,
Okay, perfect.
it was an option. He may have something else going. I don't know. He's pretty busy. So.
Right. Okay. Well, why don't we just go ahead and get started since we have a pretty full meeting, and I expect maybe a few more people will be joining us in the next few minutes. First order of business, has everybody had a chance to look at the agenda and review the minutes? And are there any comments or suggestions on those items?
Yeah, I just have a comment. It's not on the agenda because we didn't get it on the agenda, but that was basically, I'm somewhat disappointed that we couldn't get enough of us who have either had COVID-19 or have had their shots to come in and meet in person to pass the resolution or not a resolution, I guess it was a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners to support the Right to Clean Water Amendment. I think that the commission may still go ahead and pass a resolution, but they depend upon EPAC's input on a lot of things to help them decide whether something is worthy of doing or not. And us not even what do you call it, registering our opinion on the matter really is kind of, as I say, it's just disappointing to me. So anyway, just thought I'd bring that up.
Yeah, and maybe at the end of the meeting today, if it makes any sense to try and get that together for next meeting. I would think that as more people feel safe and are fully vaccinated and stuff, that might become more possible with subsequent meetings.
Or we can do what George or Mark has suggested in the past, and that's do a drive-by meeting, where we just come in, and have a parking lot meeting. It's out in the open, and we can register our vote there, and we can go away, So maybe we can try that.
Yeah. Okay. And anything else anybody wants to mention about meeting agenda or minutes? Okay, so why don't we jump right in? So we have two speakers potentially to speak with us first, and then at 7, no later than 7, we have a presentation from EPD Water Resources from Stacy Greco and Greg Owen. And so our first two speakers, I guess, I don't think Bob has joined us, and he may or may not be coming, but so we'll jump in with Jennison Kipp, and she's a resource economist from UF, and I believe also the state coordinator for the UF IFA Sustainable Floridians program. And we're just grateful that she's agreed to come here and I think talk to us about the economics of climate change a little bit. And I don't know if there's anything else that she has prepared to talk to us about, but we're excited to have her here. And Jennison, if you want to unmute yourself and
Okay,
hi.
can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here. I am trained as an environmental economist, applied economist. So I've studied this stuff in the past, and in my work with the University of Florida, done some, focused economic analyses, but I have to give the caveat that this is not my full-time job looking at, the economics of climate change, but I certainly welcome the opportunity to share kind of the perspective from the years that I have worked on climate change economics and thought about these issues. And I want to say, I'm really honored that I'm lucky to be part of our Citizens Climate Advisory Committee, trying to really dig deep into these issues for our own community here in Gainesville and Alachua County, to try to figure out not just how to plan for climate action, but like what are to move that action into being. And it's certainly complex and no easy solution. So I just want to thank you all for the invitation and also for the work that you do on the EPAC. It's really important. So with that, I do have slides, just a few that give kind of an overview, but I think really it sounds like you want to have a chance for more discussion about what, your committee's specific questions are, where you'd like to know more, or if you'd like me or others to dig deeper into like economic data, we're happy to do that. So I just put together a real a slideshow, kind of pulling together some of the material that I've already been familiar with, but I think it's a good introduction when thinking about what the economics of climate change actually look like in our backyard and to our overall economy. So gonna see if this will work. So one of the first places I've been looking at recently in the last couple of years when I try to think about, so what does climate change actually mean at the end of the day? There are increasing numbers of studies and increasing confidence and validity with being able to scale down global climate models to understand, what the local impacts are. But that uncertainty does increase as you get more localized. And if we just view out and look at the United States in terms of, these are NOAA data. So it's a NOAA website, the National Climatic Data Center keeps records or has kept records since 1980 of billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. And so this is just like the direct economic cost. This isn't including all of the cascading effects of effectively our destabilized climate in which we're operating right now. And a key take-home message when I talk about climate change or economics is that it's not in the future, it's it's here today. It's been with us for a while, and we've been seeing the impacts, for quite some time. So this was last year in 2020. 2020 set a new record for $1 billion plus disasters, weather and climate, or extreme weather and climate disasters that our country has had to deal with, trying to build up our strength and resilience and recovery to these events. So Florida, of course, we're a lot of us argue, and it's with some good arguments behind it, that we're at the front lines of climate change. That's very true. And I think we have a lot of opportunities at the grassroots to be at the front lines of the solutions. I know this is I'm going to give some global perspective that hopefully is informative as we, get a little more narrow with what the solutions are. But the International Energy Agency and Our World in Data is a really awesome resource to be able to look at kind of, put our country and our culture, our economic and social systems in perspective. So we are #1 in terms of our energy use per capita. This is a little bit dated, but the relative use remains the same. So a lot of this is focused on energy, both at the supply side and the demand side. So obviously these things are linked, but when we think about climate change and where those opportunities are, often it can be posed as an either or kind of solution, like we're pushing things on the supply side, like it's got to be the energy industry, it's got to be our utilities investing in renewable energy at the power plant level, or we need to do it on our own, and every individual has to adopt all of these, sustainable living behaviors and energy efficiency practices. And yet in reality, it's all those pieces of the puzzle, from like the highest policy level down to our individual behavior, and we can have an effect at our individual behavior level. I wanted to share this just because we are doing better in terms of our per capita energy use and coming down, but relative to the rest of the world, we're still very, we're consuming a lot of energy just to sustain ourselves and our economy and our societies. This isn't as relevant, but it is kind of, I think it provides interesting context, because so much of the debate on the supply side about energy is, often framed in terms of us having more energy independence, and even locally, same idea that we're more resilient the more we can, generate energy ourselves. And we hit an inflection point, a turning point in the US in 2019, when we became a net energy exporter. So even at a national level, our reliance on foreign countries is a little bit, has been reduced. And then this is just a real quick look at kind of, the different eras that we've gone through. We're at a turning point. We're in what a lot of people, call the Anthropocene, and our reliance on technology. And then with the convergence of, the global pandemic, with all of these changes in the energy markets, I think it's, of course, devastating, but people are recognizing that these truly global crises are converging. And I think it's opening up a lot of opportunity for innovation and people at a local level to really step up. And so this I put in here, obviously this is a lot of information, but the main point of showing this slide is, if you can look up here at the top, at the right corner. So this is all of the energy sources. So we start out with these, different renewable and fossil fuel sources that enter our economy, and they flow through our economy. And at the end of the day, this is from 2018, so just a few years ago, only about 30% of that primary energy that comes into our economy comes out in terms of an energy service or something that we actually value, whereas 70% is lost or rejected energy, like waste heat. So those are opportunities for efficiency gains, but it's physically impossible because of laws of thermodynamics for us to have 100% efficiency. But it's just important to recognize that all along the way, there are decisions being made that can help us, address climate change, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and really gain some co-benefits or, kind of the cascading benefits that come along with it along the way. And so this is just, I don't want to be so academic, but a lot of the work we do, we're trying to build general public's literacy about energy and how complex it is. There's just so much going on. And because it's fundamentally tied to our opportunities to address climate change, not just through mitigation, but also how we adapt and make ourselves stronger and more resilient to the impacts that we're seeing. I like to show this just because it kind of drives home that point about, it's not the coal or the oil or the natural gas. A lot of our energy systems in Florida, our generation plants have moved to natural gas or renewables. But natural gas is a fossil fuel, and it's not the natural gas we value, it's the ability to receive these services and do things with the electricity that we get that's generated from that, or the power. And so thinking more about what is it that we value at the end of the day, as opposed to like just we're trying to reduce that overall footprint. I'm going fast because I have a lot just to touch on a few different things here, but the other thing is we're so connected, as I'm sure you all are aware of how connected our water systems are, not just our public water supply systems, but also our natural systems. So like Stacey's, Greco's work here in the county is so critical with water conservation. Like basically every gallon of water that we conserve, we're conserving energy, and we're saving money at the top of the supply chain in terms of taxpayer money, the public funds that go into supplying all of these public goods, and then every kilowatt hour of electricity that we don't have to generate, we're also saving water withdrawals. So there's just that intimate connection there and interdependence. And then when we come to our actual pocketbook, the average American, and again, this varies, obviously in Florida, we have higher expenditures for home cooling than most places in the country because of our climate. But the average household spends over $20,000 per year on energy-related services, and a big chunk of that goes to transportation. So obviously, COVID has changed a lot of our habits and our behaviors, and reduced that kind of, pocketbook being hit with transportation expenses, transportation energy expenses, and the utilities. This doesn't include like rent or mortgage payments, but utilities alone, the typical American spends $4,000. And an important point I don't have a slide on, but that I really wanted to, I'm sure you've discussed at EPAC, is this question of fundamental to any conversation about environmental protection or climate action locally is addressing environmental justice and the energy equity questions. And so this is just an average of what people spend, but we know that we have many, many neighbors in our community who are severely or extremely housing cost burdened because of their inefficiencies in their homes, or just older homes, basic weatherization needs. And these extremely high for them utility bills. So there's a big equity question that goes along with all of this, of course. And so that's just, again, highlighting. And when Dr. Hochmuth invited me to present to your committee, he made the point that in your discussions, he shared that you're just constantly recognizing when it comes to climate change and the economics of climate change, that it's just incredibly complex, and you want to have these climate conversations to kind of dig into more narrow focused areas of where those costs are falling and where the potential to reduce those costs are. And so just recognizing that complexity is really important. I just have a few more slides I wanted to share, and then I'll turn off the slides and kind of talk about how Florida is really feeling the effects of climate change, and some things that are always on the radar of local conversations, and then some that maybe aren't. But this number 7 over here, this affordable and clean energy little icon, is from the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And often the work we do, we frame it within the context of all of those Sustainable Development Goals. But a key is, shifting off of fossil fuels. And there's been huge progress in terms of the market competitiveness of renewables to get us to these a renewable supply. And of course, in Florida, solar PV is very cost competitive, and there's a lot going on this figure, but basically this dark gray bar across the back shows the what's called the levelized cost of energy. So if you want to make an apples to apples comparison across different fuel sources, that's what the levelized cost of energy kind of over the life of the supply allows you to do. And so this is the fossil fuel range in this dark gray bar, and each column is, the first column is 2010, the second's 2006, and this is just showing where the kind of weighted average of levelized cost of energy is in 2016. So that was 5 years ago, where solar PV and all these other renewable energy sources, biomass, geothermal, hydropower, offshore wind, solar thermal doesn't give you that rapid return on investment from an economic perspective, regardless of your geographic location, that these other renewables do. But all of these other renewable energy sources are in a cost competitive range with fossil fuels. And that's even with, 150 years of the fossil fuel industry being subsidized. And those Biden in last week or 2 weeks ago hosted the Global Climate Summit and is committing to really ambitious, but arguably necessary, very necessary, like we need to act now, movement to basically end subsidies to fossil fuels and invest, make serious investments in renewable to get us to the climate targets we need to reach. And then here, that previous example was showing global, but this is in the US. This is solar PV and onshore wind. So for Florida in particular, looking at solar PV, this is showing the cost, the levelized cost of energy per kilowatt hour generated through 2019. And so you can just see how precipitously the solar PV costs have dropped. And so the market is pushing us in this direction, and the market has inertia that's not going to change even with, the previous 5 years, we had less incentives to move to renewables. And so here, again, getting to kind of the supply, another supply side question is how much are we investing? And if you remember the first slide I showed that showed the costs in 1 year of those $1 billion+ disasters, over 22 of them in the US, and here we've invested annually less than $50 billion in renewable energy alone. So that's just one piece of the puzzle. But to look on the bright side of this, it's like, well, or the glass half full, we have a lot of opportunity for improvement, right? A lot of opportunity to make significant investments that can benefit us, not just economically, but just our resilience to the changing climate and the impacts that it's bringing. So the US only invested in 2015 0.2% of GDP. So compared to these other countries, like, we need to step up our game, arguably. So I don't think I'll go, I'm gonna skip through a couple of these because this is really now coming down to like the home, what we can do in our own homes and where we have opportunities, like, on the demand side, when we get to our families and neighbors and ourselves as individuals. And so this is all homes, but I have the data for Florida too, but mostly, most of our energy end use goes to space heating, air conditioning and cooling, and then water heating and lighting. And for the South, we're actually relatively low compared to other parts of the country, but we still consume a lot per capita compared to many people. And there's a wide variation around that. And so there are lots of tools that we can go to as individuals or families to figure out how we can improve our home's efficiency, as well as just to conserve. And so I have some tips. I know I'm not here to lecture, but just to give some kind of like take-home messages. There's lots of behavioral things we can do that are gonna, thinking about it in terms of the goal for the supply side is really to flatten the curve of that energy demand. Like, that's where we save the most money, is being able to shave that peak energy demand so that the utilities don't have to go to like backup generation that is more costly and has more, typically a higher greenhouse gas footprint. So there's lots of things we can do at home that help shave that from the demand side. And then that saves them a lot of money also for homeowners, renters, as well as the utilities. But then also, for coming back again to the complexity of all of this, our food, our food greenhouse gas emissions footprint is really, really significant. And there are a lot of opportunities to address our climate footprint through looking at food, but we got to look at the whole supply chain. And these data are from a really comprehensive global study looking at the embedded kind of footprint of our food choices. And the thing I wanted to highlight is basically that across all types of foods and protein sources, it's that land use change and the on-farm, the green and brown, that makes up so much of that that footprint. And so I'm not in the business, and many, especially with the university, we're not in the business of telling people how or what to eat, but the data and the science is very clear that the lower on the food chain you eat, more fruits and vegetables, that you're going to have a much lower embedded greenhouse gas footprint. So yeah, I just put that up there. And then transportation, this is the last section where I just had some slides where there's so many amazing tools now for us to really understand kind of where we are with our baseline of use. And I know the city of Gainesville and Alachua County have done so much with trying to publicize those sorts of tools and make them, available for people to access and understand where there's opportunities to act. But this tool is really cool because if and when we get back, when we get back to whatever our post-COVID new normal is, and people are going to be commuting back to their offices more, we've already seen a huge shift in demand for alternative transportation, commuting. This was just like my commute if I drove with a hybrid vehicle versus riding my bike. And for tonight, thinking about the cost of climate change, what I love about this tool is that it includes the social cost of your footprint. So you can do this, anyone can go in and put in different scenarios for transportation to understand kind of what our footprints are. But kind of like food, it comes back to the sort of mode of transit where we can have the most impact. And we know that flying by far has like the largest impact. So again, that's something EPAC, I don't think, is in the business of telling people how to travel, where to go, what to do. But at the same time, I think it's important because it relates to our community's decisions about public transit options and being able to address equity questions by really thinking of a stable climate and helping our neighbors be resilient to increasing extreme weather events, flooding, drought, because even though we're seeing more frequent and intense storms, the droughts are also, the frequency and intensity of those droughts in Florida specifically is having a significant effect on the, our water resources and water supplies. And so I see Jennifer McElroy is on the call too, and Stacy. I'm sure they could say all of that much more eloquently than I just did, but basically that, our water, addressing that water supply and valuing it in a way that really reflects the value of our freshwater resources is so absolutely critical. And I'm gonna stop because I just talked for a really long time and I talked longer than I should have. I wanna respect your time and if anyone had any questions.
Oh, thank you so much. That was very comprehensive given the time frame you had to work in. So yeah, we really appreciate it. And I know for me, is it possible for us to get a copy of those slides? Because there was so much data there to unpack.
Yeah, and I didn't have a chance to pull it in, but I wanted to recognize my colleague and Tatiana Borisova is also at UF and a water resources economist. And she and another colleague published a short EDIS document. It's like our extension publications database, but she did a study that essentially looked at 2 studies specific to Florida about the economic implications of climate change and how it's affecting us in terms of the different sectors of the economy. And I really wanted to be able to pull that together and at least put one summary slide in there, because to me it's super powerful because it puts into context those like billion-dollar disasters. It gives it much more nuance with our local economy in terms of like how it's affecting us in terms of agriculture, water supply, breaks it down in much more detail. So I wanted to put a figure on there that kind of captured those costs as well. And thinking about those not so much as, yeah, that's a cost we're paying, but it's the value that we could capture by addressing climate change at the front end, as opposed to trying to, constantly be dealing with the damages at the end of the line associated with not making this necessary shift away from a carbon-based economy. Yeah. So yes, I can share the slides.
Yeah, that would be great. And then any additional stuff that you have, yeah, that'd be great.
I have one question. If you guys, can you hear me, you guys?
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Bettina.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Like Nisha said, it was like a lot of data and a lot of, things to digest and think about. One thing that struck me immediately when you were mentioning about actions at the individual level and, like adjusting the thermostat according to season, like turn it up in the summer, turn it down in the winter, and then dress appropriately. So first of all, at the USDA, where I worked for a while, they did that. I think they started doing that 10 or 20 years ago, or maybe 25 years ago, because that's when I worked there. And they raised the thermostat in summer to 78, and in winter they lowered it to 68. So I also worked at UF, and they do not do it there. UF is freezing in the summer, at least to me, and then it's hot in the winter. So my suggestion would be, why can't UF set an example here? You know, instead of always talking about individual levels, I think this would be, you know, really good for UF to take leadership there and then motivate a lot of people, because a lot of people work at UF.
That's such a good point. But Bettina, am I pronouncing your name right,
Yes,
Bettina?
thank you.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, like you all, those of us who think about it, are like, it's such a no-brainer, right? Like, how can we, if we can't do this, how are we going to address these really complex problems, right? And I know the UF is going through a new climate action planning process. I have colleagues who worked years ago on looking at, you know, smart technologies that automate those thermostat settings across the board. And I don't know enough about all of the internal workings of UF, but I know that it is a much more complicated solution given the ability of like individual employees or staff or faculty to actually control or optimize those things. But I also know we have a lot of really smart students and faculty and staff and people in this community, and it's something we can figure out. And sometimes it's those simple solutions that are overlooked that can really give us a huge return on our investment. I mean, it doesn't cost anything to do that. So yeah.
So at the USDA, I don't think, you know, people had a choice. They couldn't like lower the thermostat. And I think, you know, if you, I mean, if you really want to have a lifestyle change, maybe that would be the way to go at first. You know, don't let people play with the thermostat. Because I know then also, I think there seems to be the dichotomy between men and women. I think men do like it cooler. And so, you know, maybe they are more challenged at implementing this.
It's definitely a cultural, it's also a cultural thing. I'm from the Northeast, and I can say I grew up at Penn State, like in that community. And it was kind of the reverse, where in the winter, some of those old facilities, in the winter, I'd be in a class, you know, it'd be like 10 degrees outside, and we'd have to open the windows because the heat was cranked up so high, because it was like a central boiler system, or you just couldn't control it. That was a long time ago. So I know that, you know, every institution has a different challenges and a different structure. But I know like Stacy Greco has done a lot of work with the idea of community-based social marketing, that like raising our cultural awareness that a stable climate and, you know, having resources of value, natural resources, and a safe and plentiful, clean, you know, freshwater supply, clean air and water, like, is something we want to pass on to future generations. You know, that marketing that as the good that we want to provide, not necessarily the consumption that isn't bringing us that value. I don't want to speak for Stacy, but I think there's been a lot of movement in that direction, right, Stacy? I mean, like understanding how to prompt that behavior change at scale, you know? Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And I also wanted to say, I'm happy to, like, I'm such a nerd with energy and climate and data, and like, I'm happy to, and especially the economics of it, because I'm on the Citizen Climate Advisory Committee, this is something I've been wanting to dig into more. So if there are specific areas that you're interested in having, more information on, that can be of help for your advisory committee, please like relay those to me, because I'm trying to fit this in also just to get a better nuance of like where those economic opportunities in our own community are. Yeah.
Oh,
I
that's
have a
great.
question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I looked at one of your graphics listing biomass as reaching rapidly down. And I must say it alarmed me a little bit because I'm somewhat aware of the Manomet studies, the Manomet Institute, and they're concerned that biomass plants are not being scrutinized properly, and not the life cycle of the plant matters a tremendous amount in terms of the impact in terms of carbon neutrality and ultimately cost for energy. So do you have the means now to give some perspective on, given the graphic, I don't remember exactly what that graphic was. I guess that was about cost of the different energy forms. What is your impression, and what is the Manomet study holding, and is it persuading the EPA to reevaluate what they initially proclaimed?
Okay, so I'm gonna pull up that slide again to share just so I can, and I'm not familiar with that study, so I don't want to comment on it not being familiar with it, but I'd like to look at it, and so that I could get a response back to you that's accurate, because one thing I do know from conversations with a woman at the National Renewable Energy Lab years ago, I mean, there's so much variability from one facility and geographic location to the next, that the slide that I shared is, again, it's looking at, sorry, let me go back to that, make sure I'm on the right one. This is the one that you were?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, so this is a global average levelized cost of energy. And actually it's interesting for biomass, it's gone up. It went up between 2010 and 2016. So it became more expensive. And I can't say with certainty, but I wonder if the accounting and the way that these are measured, if this captured more of those like life cycle costs that you're referring to. So I'd be happy to dig into it and look. Well, actually geothermal, hydropower, those also went up, but you notice that the PV and wind came down between 2010 and 2016. And again, this is global, like I said. So if we were to actually see these as individual data points for each generation facility, there could be a really wide range around that of what those levelized costs or life cycle costs are for the facility, which is why I'd like to look, I think it absolutely matters that what that local context is, and it matters what the alternatives you're comparing it to are, which is really the reason I showed this, is because so often the argument is we can't afford renewables, or that renewables are too expensive when they're being compared to fossil fuels, not necessarily being like comparing one renewable source versus another. So does that provide a little context?
Yeah. Well, I'm also concerned about the difference between the energy density of biomass versus, I'm not defending natural gas in any way, but we seem to understand coal and natural gas being far more efficient for converting a unit quantity into energy. And so I think a lot of the debate has gotten sort of random in defense of biomass by a certain portion of the scientific community and politicians trying to gain traction. Maine fought against biomass and I think prevailed. And I don't know about other places.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely very complex. But
Thank you.
I would, yeah, if you can, I would like to see that study that you're referencing and look into it.
So for myself, I'd love to keep having this conversation, but I'm aware of the time, and we do have one other. Bob Tansing has agreed to speak to us for a few minutes. But if there's maybe one more quick question for Jennison. Otherwise, I really appreciate you coming and the offer to dig into some of the more nuanced or specific topics and potentially come back. I really appreciate that. And I think a lot of us here would appreciate that also. Anything else for Jennison? Okay, so why don't we?
And I just wanted to say thank you to Bob, and I'm sorry I cut into your time. I want to hear you talk too. So
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you so
Jennison.
much.
Thank you, Jennison.
Okay, so so Bob Tansing has agreed to be our speaker for our next community conversation on what is the official title? The cost of action and inaction of climate change is our working or our kind of tentative title that's subject to revision, but he's agreed to be the speaker. And so I know most of us, or maybe all of us, have already met Bob through another EPAC meeting. But Bob, if you want to just introduce yourself quickly, and we can maybe not, get too into the weeds about anything, but you can just kind of brief us a little bit. And I just wanted to mention too, Bob will, I believe, be coming to our subcommittee meeting on the community conversation, where if you have more questions for Bob or want to talk more about the format of the conversation, everybody's welcome to come to that subcommittee meeting, which will be on Wednesday at 5 p.m. on May 12th. So go ahead, Bob, and say hello. Thank you for coming.
Yes, well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for inviting me to the conversation. I know that I've enjoyed the ones you've had in the past, and I'm looking forward to this one. Yeah, I didn't really have much to prepared specifically for tonight. I wanted to make sure I heard what Jennison had to say, because whatever she has to say, I mean, it's obvious. The slides were wonderful, very detailed and very specific. I was going to say, the questions really I have tonight is just, what kind of a conversation do you want to have, and how'd you like me to approach it? I talked, briefly with David about it, of course, but I don't have any specifics. But we can work that out certainly, before the date. Of course, as soon as Dave invited me, I got right to it, and the way I usually do these things is like I talk to everybody around me about, oh, hey, listen, I got this new assignment, and what are you curious about, or what don't we really, what should I, what should we talk about? And so it's been fun. I do have, my notes, but again, I don't have anything specific for tonight. But basically, I could just say that the way I look at it is, of course, I'm not an economist. So the best I could do is maybe quote other studies and things that I've come across myself. So that, and obviously that's what most of us can do. We're not out there doing original research, I don't think, or except for maybe Jennison. I think she is doing that. And maybe some of the others, I don't know you all that well. But in any case, I think I would be approaching it more from the point of view of like a citizen or an activist. What am I curious about, or what do people talk to me about when I talk to them about it, that sort of thing. So I thought I would just basically start out with what Greta Thunberg usually says is, our house is on fire. Are we going to talk about how much will it cost to put it out? And then actually when I started thinking that, well, I guess in some cases, there could be a question. Is it insured? Is it about ready to fall down anyway? Do we have somewhere else we can go? Or, I mean, there's some, some ramifications, I guess, as whether or not you're going to put it out or not. Of course, there is the question of, can you put it out? Fires are uncontrolled often. Then certainly I would start with the idea of, that we really don't have much of a choice. These are things that we have to do. Now I like, of course, what Jennison showed, the cost of the extreme weather. In fact, we just had our climate reality project training with Al Gore and his updated slideshow this past 2 weekends. And there's one slide in there that he includes in every presentation, and that's this big cash register. And if any of you have seen it, it's a little bit annoying because how those old cash registers used to make that big ka-chung, ka-chung, ka-chung sound when you rang up. So it just goes on and on and on and on with the real loud sound like that to show that, all the different categories of the costs of doing nothing, basically. And there might be 15 or 20 different items that he lists. So there is certainly, we have to establish the context of the conversation, saying that, that the option to do nothing is really not an option. And I know I've heard Commissioner Ward say that multiple times, and in other conversations with people, just saying, well, it isn't really something that we need to sit and talk about a whole lot, is whether or not we should do something. We have to do something. I mean, if we're still arguing at that level, then, we've got to talk, about the science more than the cost. But in any case, I would try to make that relatively brief and say, look, we really don't have a choice. The cost of losing planet Earth is unacceptable. Now I've been reading some of the more recent books out, Inhospitable Earth, and there's another one now by another scientist that just makes it very clear that, it's going to be costly. It's going to be costly not to do anything. It's going to be costly to do anything very effective. So this is not, in fact, that's what I was talking with the guys at work just before I came here. It was like, it's going to take more than just renewable energy. Our goals with Climate Reality Project are 100% renewable or 100% committed to clean energy. Really, if we don't include that component of drawdown, and I know David talked to me about this quite a bit, that, we have to include not just net zero, but net negative. We have to get negative with our carbon emissions, because what's already baked into the atmosphere will continue to raise the temperature, for years and years, decades, centuries. And so we have to stop emitting, and we have to find a way to draw down. And so that's for me, regenerative agriculture. We have to get the carbon back in the soil. And so I would, my plan again, I can pull out my outline, but I don't quite know that it's ready to share yet. But the idea is that, okay, what are the costs of not doing anything? Then I thought we could talk a little bit about adaptation, which seems to be where the state of Florida wants to go. They want to take money away from affordable housing to build seawalls and address sea level rise. Well, again, that's chasing your tail. If you don't do the mitigation and reduce the extent of the threat or the damage, that reduce emissions, you will never be able to adapt your way out of this. The sea levels will just keep rising. South Florida, the one graphic I like to show is a picture of South Florida, well, a picture of Florida from space with what the expected sea level rise would leave us with. And basically, the north shore of Lake Okeechobee is South Florida. Everything else is underwater. All the Everglades, all the coast. There's that little bit of a ridge down the middle of Florida that's still there. So, yeah, we can adapt, but that's not the answer. So what we have to do is spend our money on mitigation. And so then the question just becomes, well, how and what's the most effective and what do you do first? So it was that sort of thing. So certainly drawdown is a great source. And I thought I would talk somewhat about the Green New Deal. There's been all that when it first came out, you know, there were the estimates from the conservatives that said it would be like what, like $9 or $10 trillion, and other, you know, people said no, it'd be a lot less than that. And so, I mean, again, as I started tonight, I'm not an economist and I can't give you an expert opinion on what it's going to cost, but I can quote the damages that, let's say, the World Trade Organization, you know, is expecting the cost. I think, and Jennison, you gave us some of that tonight, I think, didn't you? What can we expect to lose if we don't do anything? And so then that's where I get into, well, what the nature of investments. You spend it now to prevent future, you know, losses and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't say that I have anything nailed down yet, but that's kind of where I thought I would go, and more theoretical. Again, you know, we can talk again about certain sectors. There was a great article I just saw the other day on what will it really mean to take our internal combustion personal transportation fleet and convert it to 100% electricity. It's huge, you know. I mean, the bottom line for this article was that given the total capacity to build automobiles in the United States, or I guess globally, I'd have to read the article again, but basically the point is that given the total number of automobiles on the road today, that it would take, you know, decades to give everybody an electric vehicle. So this other book I was reading shows that, well, if you want to do solar, and in fact, this came up at, maybe it was a League of Women Voters where they were talking about how much solar, how big does a solar array have to be to even replace the capacity needed in Gainesville? Well, it's something like hundreds of square miles. The one book that I'm reading now says that it would take the space of the state of South Carolina to do it. So we really have to, you know, think about this. If there's going to be, the question is, yeah, it's going to cost something. I don't think we have the option to say, well, let's not spend the money. So the question is, again, will be efficiency and priorities. So that would be my approach.
Well, yeah, it definitely sounds like there's a lot of things you could dig into for the presentation, and a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. Sure. And I think, you know, at the subcommittee meeting, we'll have a lot more time to go over this stuff, but appreciate you kind of briefing us on your thoughts. And like I said, if anybody is interested in coming to the subcommittee meeting and kind of, you know, dialoguing with Bob about exactly what kind of presentation they would like to see, or just, you know, maybe kind of honing in on what will end up being presented. That is on, what did I say, May 5th?
May 12th?
Oh, sorry, it is May, yeah.
And I should have something, you know, like a rough draft at that point, probably some slides and, you know, the major transitions at least.
Perfect. Yeah, and again, I think with cost, you can apply that term broadly if you want. We don't, you know, it doesn't have to be economics per se. I think we all kind of discussed it and agreed that, you know, we were a little shaky on the economic costs of climate change. And that's one of the reasons we invited Jennison today to kind of give us a more education on that. But so you're welcome to kind of take that word costs and apply it broadly to your
I've done that.
as well.
Certainly the social cost and diversity, inclusion, and equity are things that Citizens Climate Lobby and Climate Reality Project, you know, stressed very strongly in the last training. So
yeah, I think if anything,
costs beyond dollars, definitely.
Yeah, I think if anything, just, you know, trying to fit as much as you can into the time frame of the conversation would be probably the biggest challenge.
And how long is the conversation and with the questions and everything?
We're shooting for an hour with questions, which is extremely short time. Yeah.
Well, those who've heard me speak know that I'll fill up that hour. It'll take me an hour, but yeah, it's hard to cover all of this in a short time.
Oh, for sure.
Well, thanks for one thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that we need to cover, since this is going to be like our first of this new you know, layout of community conversations, is that Well, we have this huge, big problem to solve, okay? There's a part of it which we have to solve in the next 10 years, the 10 years. And that's the one we need to focus on. And that is doable, okay? And it's doable, with, considering $1.9 trillion of cost, it's doable, at a savings, not only, yeah, we're going to put money up front, but we're going to get more than that back if you believe the project drawdown folks, and I know IFAS, it supports that movement, says it's a good thing. I've gotten links to them, to project drawdown within IFAS documents. So I know that they believe that that's a very good source of scientific knowledge. So I think given that we need to, make people aware at the very end of the day, yeah, we've got all this stuff, this gigantic mountain we've got to climb ahead of us. There's a smaller mountain we got to climb in the next 10 years. And what we do in this next 10 years has to be fast, and it has to be, very functional, and has to accomplish a certain goal if we want to keep the, and I don't think 1.5 degrees is even on the table anymore. I think we want to keep it under 2 degrees, that's really, the goal to shoot for. People are still saying 1.5 in the next 10.
Yeah, most definitely. In fact, some of the most recent stuff coming out is trying to get people to pay more attention to methane. They're saying that, in terms just directly to what you just said, David, that the methane emissions are much more dangerous in the short term.
And HFCs.
Yeah, HFCs was something that just came out too. Yeah.
If I could just real quick add to, I don't know how it'll fit in with your community conversations, but a week and a half ago, right before Earth Day, we have a group called the National Extension Climate Initiative, and we were born in end of 2019, but we've got, basically we're connecting extension educators around the country around climate, and we had this awesome climate action forum to identify what we need to do. USDA, NIFA was there, National Institutes of Food and Agriculture. They released they put $10 million toward grants, that the deadline is in July, but it's specifically for extension, which is like land grant universities like the University of Florida and Florida A&M, to work with the USDA has these regional climate hubs, which is actually another resource I wanted to provide to you. So I'll provide the presentation, but also some other links that you can explore. Anyway, I know I am going to be on at least one team submitting a proposal on that. And what they're interested in is trying to accelerate this grassroots action, and get money on the ground. And through the executive orders that Biden has signed, they're creating a civilian climate corps, kind of modeled after the Civilian Conservation Corps, in the 20th century, way back when. So there's some real money being invested into this, and to the extent that if I had a magic wand and could wave it, I would want to make sure it went to a true collaborative of like community, university, Santa Fe College, the cities, the other municipalities in our county. But I'll send that your way because, like David said, some of these things, the door is closing on how quickly, how much time we have to act to really avoid the most devastating impacts of climate change. So now's the time to think big. So.
That made me think of something Jackie Patterson just put out was people ask her, what should we do? And then after she gave him like the 10 points of what we should do, she mentioned, I need to put out an article about what we shouldn't do. And I just made a note to myself is what we can't spend our money on, like new coal plants or new natural gas plants. Or I think the Port of Jacksonville is thinking about dredging, and so they can export more natural gas, like these pipelines. We just can't do that. Leave it in the ground.
Yep. sorry, just muted myself. I want to respect Stacy's time, and I know we agreed to no later than 7 for that presentation. So we have a presentation from EPD, Water Resources. Stacy, if you're ready to present that, we're ready for you.
Sure. So I'm Stacy Greco. I'm the Water Resources Program Manager. Most of you know me, but you might not know Greg Owen, who's a senior planner on the Water Resources staff and really makes our water quality program the rock star program that it is. So Greg is going to share his screen and get us started because we wanted to provide a little bit of context. So the request was looking at sanitary sewer overflows, and I believe the request was, originally for GRU wastewater spills, but to provide a bigger picture, we wanted just to kind of, because why we care about that is because of the impact to the environment. So we wanted to talk about, what we're seeing out there in the creeks, and then all wastewater spills. We have lots of utilities in this area. And then at the end, I can kind of talk about, some of our GRU information there. And before we dive in, I just want to say that was an awesome presentation and conversation. So I'm really glad that I was here and a part of that. So thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Greg. And I think we're fine with questions throughout, but I'll leave that up to you, Nisha, however you want to manage us.
Sure. Yeah. Questions throughout sounds good.
Yeah, that sounds good. Just speak up if you have a question, because I'm not sure I can see everybody all at once on my screen with this many sharing. Can you guys see the presentation now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thanks for the introduction, Stacy. I'm Greg Owen, and I'm with Water Resources Division. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about sanitary sewer overflows and the Environmental Protection Department's program. So first, I'll just start with like a statement of the problem. And you can see this here is a map of bacteria impairments by watersheds in Alachua County. Most of our streams are impaired for bacteria. You can see that there's different kind of categories here we have verified, and that, which means there's been enough samples to say, yes, this watershed is impaired for bacteria. And then it will get moved into kind of a plan for remediation. They've decided like this is how many bacteria, how much pollution is allowed, and it's called a total maximum daily load. That's the TMDL. So they have a TMDL for the Orange Creek Basin and for the Suwannee River Basin, which we are in both of them here in Alachua County. There's a lot of different sources of bacteria. So it might be wildlife or pets. There could be sanitary sewer overflows. It could be leaking septic. These two pictures are actually pretty recent pictures of spills that we were just out on, as well as stormwater brings a lot of pollutants to our waterways. And all these combined, you have a lot of mixed sources of bacteria. So Alachua County, we do some monitoring. We do surface water monitoring, we do groundwater. We also have our hotspot sampling, and this is a program where we're just looking at bacteria specifically. And we've kind of, this program has varied over time. We've had more sites, we've kind of reduced it. You can see we used to have 18, we're down to 10. We've picked up some new ones. We're still getting some good spatial variation here. We like to have some sample locations that are kind of further upstream in the headwaters, and then some that are downstream. We also are kind of concentrating on areas that have a lot of public interface, so around like some of our parks, South of Ring or Bivens R. And these are areas that are kind of high. I also wanted to mention that although we reduced our number of sites for this quarterly hotspot sampling, we did start an additional sampling for bacteria. We're calling it our synoptic sampling. So quarterly, we're going to different watersheds and we're doing more intensive look by watershed where we pick up a number more sites. And that gives us the opportunity to see how the water parcel, like how bacteria is changing within a watershed, and kind of gives us this opportunity to kind of truncate the system and figure out like, okay, this is an area where it might be high and requires further investigation. So here's kind of a summary of our data from 2016 to 2020. You can see that it's really very variable. This red line here is the E. coli state standard, that's 410. The impairments are for fecal coliform, but recently the state has kind of switched standards to E. coli, which is now what we're sampling for. It's considered a better indication of human sources of pollution. So, you know, most of the time we're falling above that standard. That's why a lot of these watersheds are impaired, but there's a lot of variability. And it can be kind of hard to interpret. We know that after rainstorms, it tends to spike, and especially after a long antecedent period, that's probably as it flushes those pollutants and kind of resuspends sediments that are persistent, that have bacteria that's persistent in the sediments there. So in an effort to really kind of determine what are the sources, is this wildlife or not, we partnered with the state and we did some MST sampling. This is microbial source tracking. We used kind of DNA tracers to determine like, there's like a ruminant, is it like deer, is it birds, or does it have the human marker? And you can see we had a number of sites that did test positive for the human marker. Included in this sampling, we also tested for a number of chemical constituents, including imazapyr and sucralose were two of the most abundant that were found at all the sites. This was a year-long project that we did. Most of the detections were at very low levels, but some of those human source markers were positive. So we then follow that up and we do some outfall reconnaissance inventory. So if we know like, hey, Possum Creek has a positive marker, we followed up by walking these creeks, and we do this typically during a dry period. And we do that so that we can see what are the dry flows. Is there an illicit connection? Can we find like a leaking sewer line? Here is actually one that was just discovered recently on Rattlesnake while our staff was walking the creek. But we go along, we inventory the outfalls, and we sample the flowing discharge to determine, is it high? Does it have a potential for contamination or sewage signature? So, you know, we've completed 4. We're just about to complete Rattlesnake Creek as well. And I think this is what a lot of you wanted to hear about today, was our sanitary sewer overflows. So Alachua County does have a wastewater spill hotline. There's someone on call 24/7. Any spill is supposed to be called in to Alachua County, and we do respond to it. Since 2016, we have responded to 116 different wastewater complaints. The majority of those spills were less than 1,000 gallons. You can kind of see, based on how purple that mark is really how many gallons. I use kind of the 1,000-gallon spill mark as a break point, because once you're over 1,000 gallons, it does go to state warning points, so the state is notified as well as any state water body or anything, they're notified. So here's kind of a breakdown of the spills that Alachua County have responded to by entity, as well as the percentage of gallons over 1,000. GRU has the highest number of spills, but I want to caveat that with saying that GRU is very good at calling us about any spill they've had. Whereas, you know, you see here, we've only had 2 from City of Alachua or 1 from City of High Springs. I doubt that's the actual number of spills that they've had. They're just haven't been as good at calling them. We also, you know, respond to private spills, and GRU will call us about those, or a citizen will call it in. When we go out to the site, we kind of take an assessment. We want to be out there to ensure that the proper remediation is taken. We work closely with the Florida Department of Health as well as the Department of Environmental Protection. Sometimes it saves DEP a trip from coming from Jacksonville if we're out on site. And the Alachua County Health Department, we want them on site just to make sure that the human health is taken into consideration, and they kind of have more teeth. We will issue a citation if the spill is lost to like a creek or a storm network like curb and gutter, and it can't be recovered, then we're issuing citations for that. We also, if it's recoverable, we want to see that's recovered with a vacuum truck and that the area is treated. That could be like a microbial spray or a lime, and that there are signs posted so that the public knows not to go out onto site. We do encourage, like if it's a GRU spill, we encourage them to collect a sample. If they're not able to collect a sample for E. coli, we'll collect a sample. We also collect samples from water bodies that are impacted. Generally, if it's like a private entity where the spill has occurred, then they don't have the capability to collect the sample and run it. And so we'll collect that just as an insurance so we know what the impact is to the water body. I think Stacy's gonna take over from here.
Thank you. And feel free to pop back in and help with questions or anything since I'm crashing your party here. So I'm going to talk about the enforcement. Typically, if you see me on a site, it's not good news. So, like Greg said, we do issue a citation if wastewater was discharged with stormwater or surface water. So we issued 31 of those since 2016. So with the wastewater plants, we work with the state DEP, but we don't permit them. So really, DEP holds those permits for all those wastewater facilities, and they can issue fines, and those can get much larger. And all of the data, we go to all the wastewater plants to inspect them. Although typically when you have wastewater spill, it's not an issue at the plant, it's an issue in the system. And we do inspect those plants though and collect data, and we share that with the state. DEP is currently working on a consent order with GRU, which would then put monetary penalties in place for future spills. And that is something DEP's been working on for a few years with other utilities. I believe they have one with JEA already, and that's a direction that the state is moving in. And if there's specific questions about that, Jen McElroy with GRU is available, and she might be able to answer some questions there. And we've talked about, does it make sense in the future for the county to have a consent order so that, we're not issuing these citations that are, it's kind of staff intensive. They're not a large fine. We don't get the money. It goes, basically just covers the fees for processing it. So is there a different way that we should approach this? But we're in this holding pattern, seeing what happens with DEP, because we never want to duplicate. We like to have our program complement and help the state and just get more protection if we can. And you can go to the next slide. I was pressing my button here. So this is just a pie chart showing GRU spills since 2016. And the reason why GRU is the largest utility. They have 854 miles of pipes that they are managing, and that doesn't include the lateral, so from all your houses to them. So of course things are going to happen. And I will say, when we collected some data and compared it with other utilities, and we feel pretty confident that GRU does call us even for these small spills, because it's the 1,000 we're going to a water body that the state requires reporting on. So looking at the spills and that little tiny sliver of blue, that was an unknown one, but it was probably residential grease and toiletries. So that blue, that light blue, that's the biggest piece of the pie. So that's basically these unflushables. Those are the wipes that everyone thinks that just because they can go down the toilet, that they're flushable, but they cause a lot of problems, especially when they combine with grease. So that is the biggest culprit. And actually go back, I'm sorry, Greg.
Sorry.
And then, third party damage. So that is someone's out digging in their yard and they hit a pipe, or not in a yard, like a project. And those can be pretty challenging. Infrastructure, that's, problems, perhaps with pumps at lift stations, things like that. And wet weather, I don't know why I had a little asterisk that was showing it was something like 31 of these were actually from Hurricane Irma. So, that wet weather, so that's when it rains, you get infiltration, you get water that, comes in from, maybe people don't have covers on their clean outs at their house. In different places, water can get into the system and overwhelm it. And so that wet weather here that looks pretty big is, I don't know why it's not showing up. I think it was like 31 or 33 of those were actually from Hurricane Irma, which we know was a lot of water. All right, next slide. Yeah, go ahead.
You said that a number of those were due to water getting into home systems. Was anything done to, try and prevent that from happening?
Yeah, so infiltration's a big thing. And I know that GRU did a lot after Irma of trying to reduce that, because my neighbor used to work on that program and we talk about it at the mailbox. And let me get through the next slide. And then if we have time, maybe Jen can talk to us about that. So the main things to prevent sanitary sewer overflows is utility maintenance. So, you probably see GRU out there working on their pipes. They do dedicate budget for that, slip lining, trying to improve the system. The other utilities, I imagine, are doing the same thing. Third-party outreach and contracts. So trying to make sure that everyone calls that 811 number and is not messing up the system. And wherever we can get language into contracts, make sure that that people are aware of where the sewage infrastructure is. Pre-treatment programs. So some grease comes from restaurants. So GRU and I believe Newberry, so I imagine Alachua does also have pre-treatment programs where they are visiting the restaurants and doing some enforcement to make sure that their grease traps are maintained, so that those, it's like a point source, if you will, where a lot of grease could come in, to make sure that they're managing that appropriately. Education is huge, and I'm super excited because we're working with GRU and the Gainesville Clean Water Partnership, and we're gonna, try to create a new campaign, a social marketing campaign. So getting at the behavior, why are people still letting so much grease get into their plumbing system, and how can we stop it, to really try to get at that. And GRU has their Unflushables campaign where they're really trying to get the word out, but it's pretty hard. Their budget does not match that of Procter & Gamble and the other companies that sell all these flushables. So, these are some of the things we can do collectively to prevent. And I think that was the last slide, was it?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know, would you like to hear Jen's response to what's being done to reduce those wet weather overflows?
Sure.
Okay, Jen, are you still here?
I am here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. My audio didn't go to sleep. First, thank you so much for inviting me to the conversation. I really appreciate it. Preventing SSOs is very much a community effort, because there's so much that has to do with what we do in our day-to-day lives as customers and just as citizens and neighbors. And, obviously it's something that no one wants to happen. Like Stacy said, we have over 850 miles of pipe. And when you add in the laterals, it really adds in another 100 or so. That's just on the GRU side. And then there's also the private side. So it's definitely a challenge. We very much appreciate the collaboration with EPD, Stacy, Greg, Patrick. Your whole team is always wonderful to work with. And so we really appreciate that very much. So thank you. So the spills that happened during Hurricane Irma. So one thing is we had like a 200-year flood event for Hurricane Irma, and where we saw a lot of the infiltration into, or the inflow into the sewer system, was well, we actually had both inflow and infiltration. So infiltration is when the groundwater is high and it comes in because the gravity system is not watertight, and it's because it's not pressurized. And so if you have a higher pressure on the outside from the groundwater, then it can actually go inside through the joints. And so you have that happen when you have like a mounded system. And then with inflow, it's where you have stormwater that's directly coming into the collection system. Obviously, we don't want either one of those things because that increases our chances for overflows, and it also increases our treatment costs at the plant. We don't want to treat stormwater, we just want to treat wastewater. We certainly don't want to treat groundwater that's coming in. So with Hurricane Irma, what had happened is we had several really major rain events. And so the ground was very saturated. And so in the eastern part of our service area, where the water table, there's more clays and the water table tends to mound on and perch a little bit more, we had such a saturation of the soils that the I&I, when Irma hit and just kind of parked over us, it was crazy. I was running dispatch at GRU the night when the hurricane was coming in, and just customers calling, crying, asking like, it's coming into my house. What can I do? What can I do? So it was a really devastating event for our community. And so in response to that, we collected all the data. Electric was restored within, days. The wastewater effort went on for weeks. And EPD was great with helping us too, because we had to go through and find out all of these spots in the system. There were 42 spills that were related to Irma. And so it really gave us a good look at our system and where we had some weaknesses. And so we have created an I&I program after that. So we had a consultant, which I'm assuming is your neighbor, Stacey, now. And so they came in and really helped us build a really robust program. And so right now we're spending about $12 million a year improving the wastewater collection system. And that is to prevent SSOs and to just maintain the integrity of our infrastructure. If you guys ever want to know more about the I&I program, it's great. It's a smart program. It's not just, kind of shooting blind and deciding, hey, let's go fix this here. Let's do a point repair here. Let's go. It's a very well thought out scientific approach to prioritization and looking at data and going out and collecting data in the field, talking to customers, doing smoke testing, doing metering in our system and monitoring flows after small rain events and large rain events, and also looking at where the groundwater is at and where the water tables are at. And so it's very systematic how we identify and prioritize projects. And then we are going through, and some it's lining, some it's grouting manholes, some it is lining laterals, which is a hugely overlooked aspect of the collection system that a lot of utilities just don't have the time or the money to get into, and we're really digging into those. Those are the ones that would be on the private that go from the clean out, to the customer's home. And so those are very important to make sure that those are not leaking as well.
That was a much better answer than I would have provided.
And I'm happy to answer any other questions that you guys may have about spills. I promise you, I don't like them. Nobody at GRU does. My group, I failed to introduce who I was. So I am an environmental engineer for GRU, and I supervise the environmental compliance group. So a big part of our group is split between water and wastewater. And so one thing is we make sure your drinking water is safe when it gets to your house. And then our other big responsibility is making sure that all the wastewater that we collect from our customers makes it to a treatment facility so it can get treated and then reused again, beneficially reused. We beneficially reuse 100% of the wastewater that we collect. But obviously, if it's a spill, we lose it. So we don't want to lose that. We want to treat and collect everything. So.
Thank you, Jennifer and Stacy and Greg. Does anybody have questions for any of the speakers?
Sure, I would like to ask a question. How would you describe the situation here? Do we have a lot of toxicity issues? Are things relatively stabilized?
I mean, I can start that. I mean, as far as our creeks, those bacteria levels, I mean, it's pretty ubiquitous wherever you go. Any urban creek system has bacteria like that. You know, we used to cringe when some of our commissioners used to have this aspiration to make the creeks swimmable. And while we love the idea of doing everything we can do to make them as healthy and as clean as possible, you know, urban creeks are never going to be swimmable because, you know, Greg's got great footage of all of this wildlife, and we got the mailman feeding feral cats right by the creek, and we've got old septic systems. There's just so many sources, and it's so unpredictable. So I don't think we're unique, if that is your question. You know, this is an issue that's all across the state and, you know, the country.
I'm
But
just
it's safe
asking
to
about
walk
the overall situation in Alachua County, Gainesville, and does it need a lot of work or is it stable?
In terms of our wastewater infrastructure?
And our wastewater problems?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I think, you know, we're lucky that our largest utility in GRU is proactive. You know, I hear stories on NPR about other areas about aging infrastructure that makes me feel very lucky to be where we're at. And even the other municipalities, City of Alachua has a great wastewater plant. City of Newberry is talking about expanding and improving theirs. City of High Springs is doing a treatment wetland so that we're going to get better treatment. So I think we're on a good path here, and we've just the Basin Management Action Plan should be out of its legal challenge soon, which does have some extra treatment requirements for wastewater plants to try to remove more of the nutrients, and that should help our springs and our groundwater. So I think we're on a good trajectory.
Would anyone else like to respond? How about Jennifer?
I'd love to respond. So, so we have some pipes in our system that are over 100 years old. So we always are going to have room for improvement. And it's always, and this is our budget time of year, so it's always that tricky balance of using our customers' money in a way that is really beneficial for the system, and then how much useful life can you get out of the infrastructure that's there. And when the infrastructure is underground, sometimes when you find out it's not working, it's too late. So we are very proactive. We have, we can do inspections in the gravity system. Can't do that as easily in the force main system. We have started using a technology that's called Smart Ball, and it's like, it literally looks like a kid's like a little ball you'd play with, and inside of it, it has a ton of sensors, and it was really scary when we did it. We put it into a huge force main, and we were just like, please don't break, please don't jam up anything, because it would have been a really big spill. Everybody was online for it, but the benefit of that is it can go through the system and it can tell you where there's air pockets, because where there's air pockets, you're susceptible to corrosion. And when you start to, especially with these metal pipes, if you start to get corrosion and you get tuberculation, then one, you get all kinds of things that we call rag up on it. So you get all these unflushables that will build up and cause a blockage, or you get holes in the pipes. And so we do integrity testing, which is not, it's from the exterior of the pipe, but you literally actually have to excavate down and check it. And so we have a few tools we can use. The gravity system is a lot easier to check, because typically what happens is a customer calls us and says, I have a little bit of a backup, I'm not sure what's going on. And usually it's because someone in that vicinity has put something down the toilet they weren't supposed to. But what we can do then is we have these little cameras, and we just call them CCTV cameras. They're just closed circuit TV cameras. And so we put them in, we have these big TV trucks and basically kind of like a joystick, and we can drive them through. And our inspectors actually go through and they rate and look at the integrity of the pipes. And so we do that every day in the system. We have, I think right now we have 3 trucks that are dedicated to doing that. And so that's part of that I&I study. And then the ongoing preventative maintenance that we do is to classify and prioritize where we're going to do infrastructure improvements. So I would say, yes, we always need to do more, because if we stall, and sometimes what happens is when we get rate pressure, then we will get pressure from the community or pressure from the commission that says, we got to keep these rates steady or drop them. And when that happens, usually what gets sacrificed are some of these ongoing preventative maintenance programs, because a lot of them are O&M budget. And so I would always want our partners to say, yes, GRU still has work to do, because we just have to. The pipes age every day. You put a brand new pipe in today, it's not going to last forever. And we need to be systematically replacing and lining and renewing the older parts of our system.
Jennifer, if we have pipes out there that are over 100 years old, and I know pipes have a recommended lifetime, okay, when they're put in, what is the recommended lifetime of the pipes that have been in there for over 100 years?
That's a great question. And so it depends on the material. It depends on the soil conditions. We have seen clay pipes that are in great shape, and we have seen brand new pipes that fail because a weld was bad, a plastic pipe that fails because the welding was bad. And so the answer to that is, so if we decided to go out and systematically replace everything that was 70 yeyears old, then we could be replacing pipe that was still in good condition. And so that's why we really want to take the time to do inspections. And we have something called, it's lining. We do in-situ form. It's a type of lining that we've been doing. And so we have a contractor that's out there constantly. We spend so much time on this every year, and it's a fantastic program. You can take an old pipe, and depending on depending on the condition of it and depending on the material of it, you can actually, it's basically, if you picture like putting a big sock into it, and then you fill it with air, and it cures on the side of the pipe, and it forms a structural new wall for the pipe. And so instead of having to invasively remove pipe and tear up driveways and roadways, because we also try to coordinate whenever there's any kind of roadway projects going on. This lining is a wonderful non-invasive technology, and so we've been doing that for several years now, and it's been working very, very well.
Doesn't it reduce capacity?
So it does somewhat. So we do take that into account when we're looking at it, but the lining is not that big.
Okay.
Like sometimes I have one where I can just show it, but it's not that big. If you think about the different types of tuberculation that you can get in some of these metal pipes, the tuberculation is going to cause more of a capacity loss. And so what we do is we go in and mechanically clean. And so we actually take like chains, and it's a cutter that goes in and it shaves down some of that tuberculation so that liner can actually adhere better. And sometimes we might gain capacity, but it all has to be taken into consideration in the design of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This might be I'm sorry.
I just have one very quick question. Stacy, did you want to say that it is safe to walk in the creeks?
I wanted to say it's safe to be, near the creeks and go on nature walks. That's fine. We definitely want people out of the creeks, just because you can also, there's glass and things like that. And it does mess with the ecology of the creek. And for the most part, the creeks are private property, except for in the city of Gainesville parks, and they do prohibit walking in the creek. So walk on the trails next to the creek.
Okay.
There's a lot of water moccasins around the creeks too. So.
So is there a sign up for, say, Ring Park that says you shouldn't go in the creek? You think so? Okay, I'm gonna check.
Yeah. The city of Gainesville just redesigned their signs. So in any of the city parks, they have like all of their rules. And if it's a park with a creek, one of the rules is to stay out of the water. But then they have these other signs. I haven't quite seen them. Have you set eyes on them, Greg, in Ring yet? They've got some new ones.
I've seen a few, and they used to have some that, warned of the fecal coliform impairments. So I'm not sure if those are still up or not, but they were there on the board at Alfred Ring for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're really trying to get out there because of the people that are looking for shark's teeth and fossils. I saw some kids out there, and they had a sandwich. They had their lunch on the bank, so they're playing in the creek and then eating their food. And as someone that got Giardia when I was working on some of these projects, it's not fun.
I have one final question for Jennifer. When what's the highest level of E. coli that, you know, that is allowed to go into hail sink, you know, after a spill perhaps has put, and we've had some pretty large spills here in Gainesville, millions of gallons, I understand, you know, and that water has to go somewhere, and it goes into, you know, our creeks. It's one of the reasons why our creeks aren't very clean. I agree, there's no real way to avoid that. But what I want to make sure we're not doing is putting any, you know, any undue amount of, you know, of toxic substances, including E. coli, into the aquifer by letting it to actually reach the hail sink.
Mm-hmm. So I appreciate the question. I don't have offhand water quality data in front of me, but we work very closely with the Department of Health, and then for the public health and safety part of it, because we want to make sure that there's no wells in the area that were impacted first and foremost. But then we also work very closely with EPD, and we come up with a water quality sampling plan, and together we monitor the levels. And typically we see there usually is a background level as well. So we try to do upstream and downstream, and then we monitor until we reach background levels. And so we haven't had any large creek spills in the last couple of years. The last one was one where a contractor hit a line, and that was in, I believe it was 2017, 2018. So to just give you kind of an idea, so I always think about it in fiscal years. This past fiscal year so far, we've had 19 spills, and 3 of those have impacted a water body. And most of the time for us, when it does impact the water body, thankfully, it's usually not a huge quantity. I think we had one that was 10 gallons, one that was 20 gallons, and one that was, I think, 1,000 gallons. So far this year, that's impacted a creek. And so for all of those, we come up with a plan with EPD.
Okay. Maybe I can get those figures to me at some later point, and then the data, the actual levels and things like that.
Sure. And so, and we also, when we monitor them, it's specific sampling points that we determine with EPD. So it's not necessarily going to be something that's really far downstream. Usually as the further downstream we go, we see attenuation just with dilution. But if you want, I can provide a table that has you know, the spills that we've had and the quantity and what the impact of the creek. So typically when we have a spill, especially if it's in an environmentally sensitive area, well, actually with all spills pretty much now, we send what's called a vac truck, and it comes and literally vacuums up the spill. And so we have trained staff that is on call 24/7 to handle these situations. And we have a couple of VACCons in our fleet. And so what we try to do, as long as we can do so without making more damage, obviously we're not going to suck up a pond and suck up like aquatic life and whatnot, but so what we try to do is kind of ditch or get stuff before it hits the creek, and so we've been pretty successful with that more recently as we have better equipment to respond with.
I know that there's one point you have a testing which is in that park that is right by I-75. Okay, it's right before it goes under I-75, right before Hogtown Creek goes under 75 and goes on to, you know, the, what do they call that area? I forget the.
Split Rock?
Yeah, Split Rock, the Split Rock Conservation Area. So I'm just curious as to, you know, if I can get, you know, the levels that are measured, the test points around the city, and specifically that one's the most important one to me, because I want to make sure we're not putting anything back into the aquifer.
That's probably something I could provide. We do our quarterly monitoring. So that's something, you know, like GRU is only going to sample after there's been a spill and an impact to the creek. So
that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in what we've actually measured there at that location after a spill. I mean, you know, if it's been 2 years since we had one, fine. I think before that was several years, even before that, there was another big spill. But you know, I'm interested in those numbers just to see what they are, and, you know, what they are, and, you know, how they were attenuated as they moved through the system, and, you know, before it got to there.
Yeah, I mean, Greg can share some data. Unfortunately, bacteria data is finicky. So sometimes from a release, sometimes our upstream sample will have higher bacteria levels than our downstream. Like, you know, Greg and I could stand right next to each other in a creek and go 1, 2, 3, dip and get our samples, and, you know, his might be super high and mine might be
right
low. I mean, it's tricky, and it doesn't persist for long, right? I mean, after our spills, I haven't looked at that data recently. I mean, it drops down pretty quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, usually within 1 to 2 days, it's back-to-back ground. Obviously, for a larger spill, sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but.
Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sampling error. I wonder if I've read in some reports about the Sweetwater Branch and other creeks that have been tested, and they comment about the variability, as you observed, in the amount of bacteria in just a stretch of stream. If you put your probe down, you may be disturbing sediments that are rich, whereas one that is only a short distance, very short distance away, might appear to be barren or relatively so. So how do you statistically cope with that or interpret what your results are, given the sampling error?
Do you want me to take that? I mean, we try to be very careful when we collect our samples. I mean, that's an excellent point. If you get sediments in your sample, it's going to come back high. So we try to be very careful to get that and not get any sediments and not disturb the bottom. You know, we walk from downstream up and try to have as much minimal impact as possible. We also, with every sampling event, we do collect a duplicate sample. So we have some comparison data to say, like, is it within range of our other samples? And that, I mean, that's the best we can do. Just the nature of kind of the method of analysis, you really have a lot of variability in that reporting data.
Well, I've also read that, I think it was through Robin, I can't remember her last name.
Holger.
One of her reports, she may have just simply said it to me, that the sediments are worse when there's less rain, or that the concentration of bacteria appear to be higher, and that may be an artifact of sampling because you're doing it in a dry spell. So
Sure.
is that how do you cope with that?
I mean, it's like I said, I mean, you have to be very careful not to resuspend sediments. That's why we see lots of times after rain, if it resuspends the sediments, you know, you have this bacteria is kind of persistent there, the creeks are shaded and it grows, and then the rain comes, everything kind of gets disturbed.
Yeah.
You might have high results. Now, what might happen as well is you have a lot of rain and suddenly it's diluted and now you're getting low numbers. So it's tricky, you know, it takes some knowledge and interpretation when we get our results, and we try to take that into account when we get our results. You know, we typically don't sample 24, 48 hours after a rain event unless we're in a water event. And then we take into consideration what was it like for, you know, the 7 days previous to sampling. And if we see a number generally like that, 1,000 colonies per milliliter is kind of our cutoff. Like if it's over 1,000, we're going to go out, we're going to resample, we're going to investigate the area and see, like, is there something else going on or not?
It's almost like the data is qualitative, even though it's quantitative, you know, it's kind of painting a picture for us, but
Yeah.
you know, it's exactly, George, why I get nervous when anyone wants to use our water quality data to, you know, evaluate policies. So for example, you know, when we did our pet waste campaign, you know, the fecal coliform data looked really good for like the first 2 years after that. And I, you know, was tempted to call that a success, that our campaign caused that difference. But, you know, we couldn't really in good conscience make that statement. So in a way, you know, a lot of our like bacteria data isn't necessarily used for regulatory purposes. It's kind of helping us to paint the picture and get a better understanding of that.
Does the data get used for mitigation intentions? For instance, this is a wild, crazy idea. I'm just going to throw it out. Is there any idea of vacuuming up sediments from creeks where they know a concentration could seed an entire, you know?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, have you seen it, FSA? Is anyone doing that in any? I mean, I think you risk then messing up the habitat.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I should correct myself. You know, our data is sometimes used for regulatory because it does feed the whole TMDL BMAP purposes, but it's not like if we get a high hit that, you know, we're going out and trying to find someone to give a ticket to, you know, it does, we do resample because it could be that we're onto something and, you know, that we need to do some more of those investigations that Greg was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, all our data is uploaded to the state database, and they are using that data to like put these water bodies on, you know, verified listing or to remove them from verified. And even like some of our hotspot sites, we've dropped those because they'll come back lower. So, you know, we're trying to concentrate on the areas that are higher or that have a lot of public interface. And even like some of the new methods. So there's a couple different methods for E. coli. There's a filter, there's a membrane filter method, and there's a most probable number. And even that's kind of like the most probable number is an estimate. Like this is what we think it's likely to be for bacteria counts.
I think Jeff had a comment about the impact of septic systems versus water that's treated through GRU. And to kind of follow that is part of the infrastructure improvement budget at GRU targeted towards increasing the amount of homes that go through GRU.
That's a great question. And it's one that we're going to be bringing some information to the commission soon, the city commission. And so we do a regular evaluation where we look at our customers and we look at who, basically who we're serving water to, but we don't collect wastewater from, or who are we serving electric to that we don't serve water or wastewater from. And so we create what we call like an imputed septic tank map. So we don't know everyone who has a septic tank, but we can discern fairly well looking through the data and crunching it. And we believe there's about 6,000 in our service area right now. And so just to put that in perspective, we have, if we're talking on a parcel level, I believe we have about, I want to say 50,000 parcels. And so 6,000 of those parcels are not on centralized sewer. And then we have 65,000 customers. And so that 6,000, whether it's multifamily or single family, that's the difference between parcel versus customer number, or excuse me, the 65,000 connections, not customers, but connections. And so some are, you know, apartment complexes where you might have, you know, 2,000 customers that are going into one facility. So, so we do track that information. And yes, we are trying to, it's pretty challenging because the pockets that aren't served are usually pockets that are technically not very easily served. So when you go to the engineering of it, a lot of times these are areas that are lower lying than the rest of our service area. So it's not just that it's proximity to a line, but it is having to pump, you know, you would actually have to collect and then pump up. And so we do evaluations throughout the service areas to looking at cost estimates. One that we evaluated not too long ago was $25 million to hook up 2 neighborhoods. It's very expensive.
It's nothing.
So for the
That's
GRU
nothing.
goal,
25 million is nothing compared to the amount of dollars that we're talking about here. This is the single most impactful thing that Alachua County could do is to eliminate septic tanks. We've talked about creeks and everything else. It's the single simplest thing we could do. I live in Kenwood, a few hundred yards west of the Kanapaha plant, which I've been at many times. 45 years I've designed wastewater treatment plants. I just don't understand why that's not a focus.
so Kenwood, compared to the collection system around it, is lower.
I know that.
And so it would take, so I want to say that, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe like 100 units, household units that are there. And so it would require infrastructure.
No, almost twice that.
Okay, so about 200. I'm just kind of trying to visualize. So technically, what we have to do, so we have to get permission from the commission to spend those kind of dollars. 25 million is huge from our budget. So like I said, we spend about 12 million a year on the wastewater collection system, and that 12 million needs to continue to get spent. And so The difficulty is when you take one home that needs to be hooked up, it's somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000 to get them off of a septic tank onto centralized sewer. We have canvassed and tried to convince customers to connect that are in easier spots. And when I was first hired at GRU, I had, about 15 interns that I hired for the summer. And I had little packets and they went door to door asking people to connect, and not a single person connected because they didn't want a reoccurring GRU bill, because they said, oh, my septic tank's free. I don't want a bill every month. So there's that factor. But what we're trying to do is we are trying to work with stakeholders and leverage funding. So we do have some state funding right now. And we do have another grant that we either we just got it or we're close to getting it. And so what we're doing is we're prioritizing the best environmental benefit. So if you have a septic tank that is failing and it's near a creek, or it's near an environmentally sensitive areas, those should have higher priorities than ones that where perhaps the septic tank is functional and you've got a lot of sand and it's filtrating in and it gets a lot of attenuation. Not saying that that helps with the nutrients, obviously, but thinking from like a public health and safety and immediate, like coliform type of environmental impact. So we do try to look for those more environmentally sensitive areas. Of course, those are very challenging to serve. And so we do have a couple of projects that are in the queue, and I believe May 20th is when that's going to go to City Commission. And so I would just encourage the public, I would encourage boards like these to really speak to the commissioners and let them know that it's a priority.
First of all, I live about 100 yards into the county. So I'm not in the city. I'm on the west side of Tower Road. I believe that's the county. But excellent answer. I really appreciate that. And I would really like to talk to you more or someone else here within the last year and a half. And like I said, this is something I do every day. 45 years I've designed wastewater treatment plants, and I did it again today. But in the last year and a half, I've spent, or my family, we spent like $15,000 to totally put in a brand new septic tank, which replaced two that were here. I watch this and I just shake my head at what we're not doing. All I'm saying is, and then I'll get off the line here, is, in my opinion, and I deal with the environment every day, wastewater, that's what I do from 7 to 11. The single most impactful thing that we could do in Alachua County is to get those 6,000 people hooked up to an advanced wastewater treatment plant. If it requires a lift station, so be it. But we're talking about things that are very, very critically important here. And someone shouldn't have the right to say, no, I'll just continue to spew whatever into the environment. This probably requires legislation, frankly, and I'd be all for it. And
I do want to remind everyone too that, with septics, connecting to wastewater is not the only option. There's also upgrading to, performance-based systems that are, removing the nutrients. Because septics, if they're functioning, do a pretty good job with the bacteria. It's the nutrients that we're concerned about. And so, there is an alternative, because there are some places where there just aren't wastewater facilities, or it's just not technically feasible. So it is another alternative, and it is something we will be speaking with the county commission about, I would think, in 2021.
I would suggest this. It's always feasible. I just worked with a consulting engineer today that built an entire wastewater treatment plant in the middle of nowhere in Indiana that's all solar powered. I realize that there are complications, but these are just critically important things. I think GRU does an outstanding job, but they can't address what gets left in my backyard. I just think it's something that we need to do in the 21st century.
Wow. Stacy, what you just said, given that there are places where they're just too far away from plants like GRU, is there a place for composting toilets? I know whenever I suggest that, there are some people that chuckle about composting toilets, but I've seen their effectiveness in places like in Nova Scotia, in Peggy's Cove, where it's solid rock, and they can't embed anything. Everything has to be in the Bronx Zoo has facilities that can handle 600,000 or more people every year, all composting toilets. And I think Bob Tanzik's daughter told EPAC that when she was at the University of New Hampshire in law school, the students enjoyed going up to the composting toilets on the top floor, and they'd walk up all these different stairs, these flights, just to enjoy, have the pleasure of using a composting toilet. So they even work on Lake George on the islands. You go camping on the islands, it's a pristine lake with clarity. You use a Secchi disc there, you get 40-foot clarity. That's what works there. Why can't it work here? Some state parks have them.
I think there's definitely some behavior change needed to get people to adopt it. And also it is challenging with the health department right now. You know, I recently called them for a side project I'm involved with, and it was difficult getting some information on how we would build that.
Yeah.
I think there are some hurdles, but perhaps in the future.
Well, the province of Nova Scotia has a very active environmental department, and they are ready and willing to provide information. And there are more than large, expensive, composting toilets. Other companies are getting involved in making small, individual family size units. That's all.
Okay, so I'm noticing it's 8. So we probably should wrap up soon. Does anybody have any last thoughts that they'd like to get out before?
If I could just ask a question. First, I should point out that my daughter Kathy went to the Vermont Law School.
Oh, excuse me.
Thank you for the shout out to Kathy.
Okay.
But the other comment I had, and I don't know exactly this. I hope it doesn't open a can of worms, but I'm wondering, I think I first got this when Greg asked the question. We've talked about the like gallons of sanitary sewer overflows and the levels of bacteria. What kind of tracking do we do, or can we? I know Stacy mentioned that she got sick, but are there reports on the actual number of people that are hurt or get sick because of the threat that apparently is in the creeks all the time? I mean, there's certain, and I don't want to say that it isn't a problem we need to address, but I'm just wondering how much of illness is caused by these things out there in the environment.
That would be a question for the health department. I will say, people that are getting sick would be people that are in areas where they shouldn't be. I will say that since I got Giardia, I have learned to not touch my eyes as much and to wash my hands before eating that snack when I am in that work truck.
Yeah, so clearly there's a threat and we have to monitor and make sure that the threat is very low, but I just wonder, how many people are out there suffering because of these things.
It's an educational problem.
Just curious.
But I do object to saying where people shouldn't be. It's where, it's not safe to be. I mean, to say people shouldn't be in streams and creeks and rivers and things like that, I think it's just a kind of a fundamental,
they're trespassing.
Well, yeah, if they're on private land, yeah, and in a lot of cases they are. But to say that, I mean, we have to qualify that statement, I think, in order to make it a correct statement. So, anyway, thank you all. This has been a great meeting. Yeah.
To bring it back around to, I'd be interested in, I didn't present anything at all on the public health effects of climate change and shifting, vector-borne diseases and all of that good stuff, but like putting that into context with, what's the risk, the public health risk from exposure to bacteria, and then looking at how many people, are affected by the health impacts of flooding and hurricanes and lack of access to fresh sanitary water following these events. So interesting discussion, good discussion.
Yeah. And thank you, David, for qualifying. And I wasn't saying that if someone's in the creeks, they deserve to get sick. My
I
point
know
is,
you weren't. I know you weren't. I just
you
had
know,
to.
most people aren't going to get sick from these spills.
Yeah. And we don't want people in the creeks. You know, I mean, we know that there's a, that there's E. coli in there and other things. We don't want them in there because of that. And there's people going in there waiting and going, as you said, looking for shark's teeth and all sorts of things, and they shouldn't be doing that.
So we need good signs that make that clear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if people realize what was in the creeks, that would just be a natural deterrent.
Yeah, really.
I just want to, one comment. So I'm a microbiologist and I did a lot of water testing. And can you guys please speak to E. coli? Because E. coli really is an indicator. I mean, that does not make people sick. So can you clarify that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, this is just an indication that it could be possibly influenced by sewage. So, it doesn't necessarily mean it's sewage. It's just an indicator, and it is in human intestines, but it lives in other intestines as well. So,
yes. Mm-hmm. And so then what is the threat? Other bacteria, like what
well,
could be
then
in
there's
there
a threat of
that
like Stacy got Giardia. So there's a threat of disease vectors that could make you sick, gastrointestinal diseases.
Also endotoxins, they induce inflammation. I mean, there's a huge amount of science about the hazards of endotoxin. So if you're exposed to enteric bacteria, you're being exposed to lipopolysaccharide fragments, which are on the surface of enteric bacteria, which triggers an immune response. And if you're chronically exposed to it, let's say you're working in a farm or a sewage treatment plant, and you have a exposure to a high level of endotoxin, you have a high level of systemic chronic inflammation, which is linked to all the major disease groups, heart disease, ad nauseum, all kinds of stuff. So there is a health risk component to it.
I was just saying, and remember that endotoxins also come, endotoxins, cytotoxins, hepatotoxins, and neurotoxins all can be found in green, blue-green algae. So, there's a number of sources for it.
So are we going to adjourn?
Yeah, so before we adjourn, Mark, do you have any briefing points for us?
No, not tonight.
Okay, great.
Very
Yeah,
good
so I guess,
meeting.
what was that, David?
Very good meeting.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, very good.
Thank
And just to reiterate, I guess May 20th, the City Commission meeting, they're going to be going over this issue of that involves septic tanks and providing or where that infrastructure budget is spent around that. Is that a correct way to phrase it, Jennifer, if you're still on?
Yes, that was good. Don't think I have the exact agenda item in front of me, but it is for it's Southeast 13th Avenue Septic to Sewer Project is what's being presented.
Okay, great. Yeah, so if that's an important issue to anyone here, which at least a few people, I think it is, it's worth going in and showing your support for that project. And then once again, we have our subcommittee meeting on May 12th at 5 p.m. So if anybody wants to get into the weeds a little bit about what we'll be presenting on the next community conversation with Bob, you're all welcome to that as well. All right, well, so yeah, great meeting everyone. Thanks for coming. And I guess we'll adjourn.
Thank you for the opportunity for me to talk about my Giardia.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Stacy, we need to get together and swap Giardia stories. Mine are not from the U.S. though, so.
We woke up Scott with a Giardia statement.
I hope you're both feeling much better now.
Well, after George's comment, now I wonder if that's why I have celiac disease. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.